Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our latest installment of the AWS and Innovation Bay content series. My name is Rohit Bhargava and I am part of the startup team at AWS, where our mission is to help grow the quantity and quality of startups and founders coming out of Australia and New Zealand. We're extremely excited to have teamed up with the Innovation Bay team to deliver this as a weekly content series that will run every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. This series has been focused on bringing you the real stories and insights of founders and operators that have dealt with the coalface of the pandemic. Over the last few weeks, we've had guests on who have had to scale their operations due to increased demand. We spoke to Jody Oster, the GM of Uber Eats, on how Uber is tackling the unique challenges on a global level, and Simon Griffiths, the CEO of Who Gives a Crap, who faced unprecedented demand for their product, including a waiting list of over 500,000 people. And last session, we spoke with Toby Skovrin on the challenges he has faced with businesses in the fitness and co-working spaces. Today, we shift gears and look at this from the perspective on the other side of the table as an investor in multiple companies affected both positively and negatively from the situation. We're delighted to have Rachael Yang, the investment manager at Giant Leap Fund, join us for this webinar to discuss how COVID has affected Giant Leap portfolio and their investments moving forward. If you aren't already familiar with Innovation Bay, it is the longest running community group for tech startups and investors in Australia. Their mission is to support founders on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond. They run events and programs across the country, now online, all focused on helping a community of over 5,000 founders, people working in startups, investors, and others to learn, connect, and grow. If you're not already a member, sign up at innovationbay.com. Before I hand the mic over to Rachael to kick things off, I wanted to let you know how the session will run. We'll start with around 35 to 40 minutes of Rachael interviewing Rachael before we jump into questions from you. Please submit any questions you have into the Q&A tab, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. I'll jump in at the end to facilitate this part of the session. We also have a chat function running so you can engage with others in attendance. Please be considerate of others whenever speaking through these channels. With that out of the way, I'll hand over the mic to Rachael Neumann to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Rohit. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachael Neumann from the Amazon Web Services team. Welcome to our webinar series where we dive deep with our startup leaders to hear how they're navigating through these unprecedented times. For those of you who've joined us in previous weeks, as you've heard Rohit mention, we've had insightful conversations with experienced founders like Patrick Llewellyn, Jody Oster, Simon Griffiths, all helping us to shine a light on how they're managing through turbulent times when their company or industry has been disproportionately rocked by the current crisis. And these have ranged from demand on designers, food delivery, and toilet paper. Now, this week we have Rachael Yang joining us. Rachael's an investment manager at the Giant Leap Fund, which is Australia's first venture capital fund that is 100% dedicated to investing in impact startups. Those are rapidly scalable businesses that blend financial returns with real and measurable social and environmental benefits. Giant Leap is part of the Impact Investment Group, which is Australia's leading impact investment manager, and they are out to prove that finance can be a force for good for positive impact on people and the planet. Now, Giant Leap is sector agnostic, but it looks for impact in lines with three broad themes that I'm sure Rachael is going to talk us through, which is empowering people, sustainable living, health, and well-being. The Giant Leap portfolio has 18 companies to date, and alongside her role at Giant Leap, Rachael's also on the board of Startup Victoria, which is a nonprofit grassroots organization supporting startup founders to succeed, and is a member of the Victorian State Government's Innovation Task Force. So without further ado, Rachael, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Rachael. It's great to be here, and thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, great. So we spoke to Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap a few weeks ago, who saw a dramatic increase in their business, as well as Jody Oster from Uber Eats. And sometime on the flip side, we've talked to Toby, who the pandemic has greatly impacted his businesses in co-working space and in fitness studios. When you zoom out and look at your portfolio of investments, how has the pandemic affected it en masse? And then maybe we can talk about some specific examples where it's had a unique impact on those companies.
Sure. So en masse, it's a bit tricky to say as a generalization because we have companies across those three themes, as you mentioned, but we are sector agnostic. So we've got companies in fashion, education, health, waste management as well. So it's really been varied in each of those sectors. But as a whole, I think we're very lucky that many of our portfolio companies raised just before this all happened. So they had, funds to be able to support them through this time. and were really great in adapting and really reducing their expenses, improving efficiencies, and trying to make sure they had enough runway to kind of weather the storm. I think individual portfolio companies have been affected in various ways. For example, Academy XI, they were doing many face-to-face kind of education programs, and now they've really shifted online, and they've done that really well. And we've then seen them already picking up speed in the online area too. So it's actually been good to be able to think differently and pivot in a way that can really facilitate scale.
Yeah, great. If you take a trip back memory lane to March, when kind of this crisis was all starting to swirl around us. I know March was like 4 or 5 years ago. When we were in these moments of peak uncertainty, it was a very stressful time for everyone, but we know in our community, founders especially, were under quite a bit of stress. Think about what were some of the founders grappling with or turning to you for, and how did you support your portfolio during this time?
So I think with our portfolio companies, we checked in with each of the founders when this all happened, not just from a business perspective, but really more so on the personal perspective. I think this has been a really tough time for many people, and if you're running a business and you're trying to navigate a period of uncertainty whilst also being a leader, it's really challenging. And I think we kind of all went through these stages of what they're now referring to as the grief cycle, and trying to also lead a company in that, and then make really tough decisions as well about reducing costs and trying to retain jobs. It's all a tricky time for everyone. And I think for us, we wanted to just be an open door, and make sure that they knew we were there to support, but not be too kind of in their faces about what they should or shouldn't be doing. So we provided them with resources, things like grant, links, and all of, introductions if they needed it, offers for help. We ran a few sessions to connect all of our founders, Zoom conference for them to go into breakout rooms and talk to each other about what they're experiencing. And then also things like, we brought along Darryl Wade, the co-founder of Intrepid Travel, to come and speak to them as an intimate group, just to talk about his experience, especially a significantly impacted company, but a really impact company at heart. But he's been in the industry for 30 plus years. So he's kind of an expert in navigating these types of situations. So it was really great, and he was so generous with his time and experience in being able to talk through those things with founders.
Yeah. Rachael, you talked about, trying to, show your founders that you're there for them, have the resources, but not kind of overwhelm them or bombard them. We know that at the best of times, some startup founders talk about mentor whiplash, where lots of people are giving them advice. And I can imagine during the, peak of this crisis, what we hope is the peak, they were getting lots of different advice from different angles. How do you help founders manage that kind of mentor whiplash? And what do you think were a few either pieces of advice or approaches that you had to try and both give them the resources they need, but not overwhelm them during this time?
So we did a couple of things. We created our kind of own founder newsletter where we shared information with them in a way that we hope was helpful for them. So things like, I was saying, resources like grant funding, etc., that they could access in that kind of contained way, so that we weren't bombarding them with kind of messages. And then also having we created a WhatsApp group for all our founders to engage with each other. And, if they needed help from us, they could reach out, but, not being too kind of overbearing with our help. And then we asked them also what they wanted from us. So we really wanted their feedback on if, they wanted us to do more or less. And, some of them, I think we've got a really great level of trust with many of our founders. And I think that for them just to be able to say frankly to us, this is too much or this is not enough, is what we're trying to create in terms of the relationship. And then in terms of the way that they deal with it, I think just providing them with the support that they should trust their gut, and that, you know, no one knows the business as well as they do. And so, you know, we can say all we like about what we think they should do, but they actually know deep down what they should be doing. So just trusting your gut.
I heard someone say, I think it was on one of our previous shows, you know, that the steels of leadership are forged in the fires of hell. And in moments of crises, we sometimes see our leaders really step forward, and we see these founders who already have incredible capacity to navigate both strategy and team. That's why, you know, presumably you invested in them, but we really see them step into their power. Do you have any examples, and you can choose to name names or not, of either teams or leaders that you see really led in an extraordinary way during this time?
I have to say, for all founders, I've been really inspired by the handle this, and, you know, to be working with them and trying to support them as much as we can. It's more, you know, they're doing all the hard work. We're just basically the cheerleaders on the sidelines. You know, particular examples of some of the generosity that they've shown in times where you would think they'd be in a kind of scarcity mindset. They've actually, you know, demonstrated that they're really mission driven and they are true impact businesses by offering supports for help to others. So, you know, Academy XI is one example of that. Again, if I go back to the challenges that they faced from having to kind of close the campuses and then moving online, they've then offered businesses that have been, you know, had a reduction in revenue and had to kind of let people go, free courses. And they also established a partnership with a not-for-profit called Generation to reskill and employ a whole lot of people for free as well. And then Future Super, you know, a 100% fossil fuel free super fund. They have been giving their government stimulus to members that have been hardest hit by COVID. So, you know, that generosity in that kind of time of real, you know, hardship and challenge for them has been really inspiring and wonderful to see.
Yeah, amazing stories. And you can tell in those behaviors that those leaders are really thinking about the long game rather than getting kind of stuck in the short game. And so maybe I'll segue into a question about your kind of long game and short game as you think about your portfolio. And this is a question that I know lots of folks on the line would have. And that is, I think that there's a bit of a, I don't want to say a fear, but a question around how venture funds will behave during this time, if they will orient their resources, both time and money, into their existing portfolio, or whether they would still be open and looking outward towards new investments. How has Giant Leap thought about allocation of time and capital during this period? And so has your strategy changed in the short term?
So our strategy hasn't really changed in the short term from a portfolio perspective. You know, us along with other VC funds, we have committed capital, so we have funds to deploy. And so, you know, we haven't lost those funds. You know, they're the same with other VCs. We all have that kind of funding available. It's just how we look at opportunities, which has slightly differed, I think. I think we're just a bit more cautious in terms of the uncertainty that we're dealing with in this environment. We can't, you know, be naive to say we're just acting as business as usual, because it's definitely not that. You know, we need to be thinking about how the individual startups that are coming to seek funding and managing these current times and what their sector and their business will look like post-COVID. And so there is, you know, there are kind of, there's a slightly different approach in how we consider the investments to really take that macro environment into perspective. And then also, I guess it's really thinking about the founders and how they've kind of managed these times and adapted to that as well. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. But in the long term, I think, you know, ultimately we'll reset. And I think actually what's happened is people are fearing seeking funding now. You know, we've seen deal flow reduce a bit at this time. And I think it's just because people are not really wanting to kind of speak to investors without putting their best foot forward. And I can understand that. So, but I'd encourage people to kind of really think about whether that's a fear that should be kind of acted upon, or if they should just kind of go out there and talk to investors.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. If there's lots of dry powder in the market, as you say, they should go out there, and if they have a great problem that they're solving and a great product and a great team, then now's a good of time as any. I want to talk a little bit about impact investing. So obviously this is your, your space. It's amazing that Giant Leap is the first one that is fully dedicated to this space. So I know that this is your bread and butter, but for some people who are joining us today, this might either be a new concept or one that they are looking to get across. Tell me just personally, what is your passion about, where does your passion impact investing come? And why is Giant Leap really bullish on this as a lens through which they're investing?
So my passion has really come from being, in consulting and working with kind of government a lot of the time in solving those really deep social and environmental issues. And what I found was with government, as great as they are in trying to kind of address those problems and trying to solve them, there is politics at play, and it's hard to kind of really move as fast as we'd ideally like these problems to be solved. And so for me, being able to use a private sector lens and being able to be agile like startups can be, and just not worry about any rules and just go for it and solve those problems right now when they need to be solved. That's what really draws me to impact startups and what drew me initially to Giant Leap in the first place. I think for us, it's very much about that thesis of blending, commercial returns and social environmental benefit, and showing that you can have both. We're seeing funds in the US that have been, impact investing is a much more established industry in the US, and there's a fund, K4 Capital, that is outperforming other funds, and it's impact focused, and it's in that top quartile of its vintage. So we're trying to prove that this thesis is a thing, and impact investing isn't something to be kind of put aside, and it's just a lens that we look through to make our investments.
Yeah, great. You've teed me up nicely, Rachel, because you talked about how startups in their agility and their both desire and ability, to move quickly, to solve problems, can have a real impact in some of these areas. We're going to try something new for the show, and we want to throw up a poll to the audience, and we want people to vote and tell us which areas do you think startups can make the biggest commercial impact on. So whether this is kind of renewables, disability, environment, poverty alleviation, employment, health, rights and access, or homelessness. So if everyone could just take a moment and just put your vote in. I'll ask Rachel another question while everyone's taking the time to cast their vote, and then we'll pop it up. Rachel, you can tell me if the results surprise you, are consistent or inconsistent with what you're seeing in the market. So maybe I'll ask you a question around what do you think is the most interesting or innovative, and sorry, there was another one there in education. Just make sure you scroll down so you can see all of your options. What do you think is one of the more innovative companies in your portfolio that has tackled one of these areas in a way that you thought was extremely novel, and by tackling the problem from a completely different angle, you think will like significantly move the needle?
Yeah, so the first one that comes to mind is GoTerra. So they're a company that breeds black soldier flies to consume organic waste, so effectively a maggot farm. And I went to visit that maggot farm, and it is a waste processing facility. So I definitely had to kind of have my wits about me, and yeah, definitely. The smell was challenging, to say the least. But it's incredible what they're doing in using kind of robotic technology and breeding those maggots to then use those to consume organic waste and reduce tons of organic waste going to landfill. And then the maggots themselves get turned into livestock feed. So having a circular solution like that is pretty incredible. And the founder, Olympia, is just phenomenal. She's an absolute powerhouse. And I think that we've been really impressed with how they've kind of been operating and the big problem that they're solving, because waste is a huge business.
Yeah, absolutely. If you didn't say it, I was going to also say one of the most impressive things about GoTerra is Olympia herself. She's an incredible founder. And what I love about GoTerra is that it is solving the problem from multiple different angles and creating revenue from solving a very real problem and making money. So when you can solve a problem and make money, I think what we have here is impact investing. So, okay, we have some of our results in. Thank you for those who have voted. It looks like health right now is the overwhelming favorite, with 28% of folks choosing health, followed by environment, and then with renewables closely behind. So our guests seem to think that these three investment areas are ripe for startups to disrupt. When you think about that list, where do you feel like there's a ton of promise and untapped potential still with room to go on the investment space?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think there was a pretty good spread in terms of what people chose. I think this is the easy one to pick because I think everyone really understands that impact. And I think there's certainly a way to go with the problems that startups can solve in the health sector, especially with COVID as well. But I think one of the ones that I saw was quite low was disability. And I actually think there's a lot of, there's a long way to go to solve the issues there. One of our most recent investments is Loop Plus, and they have created a cushion and software platform to help people in wheelchairs manage the risk of pressure sores.
Yep.
And when you think about that, it's really empowering those individuals to understand the pressure, to reduce that risk, because 1 in 4 people have that incidence of pressure sores. And I think that what it means has flow-on effects for the health system and costs in the health system. So I think the flow-on effects with helping with address some of those areas in disability are pretty substantial in terms of cost reduction to the health system, but also just servicing a group of people in the community that really have been overlooked a lot of the time.
Yeah, and you know what, we always talk about in investments, you obviously, you need a strongly articulated customer problem. You need a large and growing market. You need a team that kind of has some unfair advantage in being able to solve that. And often what you need is some sort of macro trend or change that all of a sudden makes something that wasn't possible before, something is really exciting and right for investment. And disability is one of those things with, NDIS and changes in how money flows in disability. It all of a sudden makes for a very ripe investment area. Are you finding that to be true? And likewise, do you see other kind of big macro shifts that are making some of these impact areas really attractive?
Yeah, absolutely. So in particular in the disability space, you see an accelerator like the Remarkable Accelerator. They're remarkable in what they do, but also there is a real opportunity there with the NDIS and the demand and the problems that those startups are solving. Other areas that I think, renewables in particular, I think a few things have kind of coincided in terms of improvements in technology and things like solar panels and an understanding of the science behind, the costs associated with renewable energy and creating renewable energy. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And we're starting to really have that as a focus because people are realizing climate change needs to be solved now, it needs to be addressed. And so as people increasingly understand the problems at hand, and then also the solutions being quite cost effective, I think the opportunities then reveal themselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's always that tipping point where all of a sudden the cost of doing something starts to reduce dramatically. And I think that renewables and solar is certainly, nearing that point. So that's, that's really exciting. Do you think that, does COVID and kind of a post-COVID world make some areas more attractive to you than they were previously?
I think areas like reskilling and employment and education, that space is really, I think ready for disruption. You know, as we've heard from the Prime Minister talking about job maker and the changes that are potentially coming in relation to, you know, reskilling and employment, I think that creates a real great opportunity, and it's in demand, because what we're seeing is that jobs will be made redundant. You know, there won't be as many jobs out there as there previously were. A lot of things are kind of becoming automated and digitized. So where to from here? And I think ensuring that people have gainful employment is really important for our economy, but also for our community and the individuals themselves within that community. So I'm excited to see what happens in the education space.
You know, you mentioned employment, and I know in another conversation that we had, Rachel, you have an investment in Work 180, which is an incredible company. And tell me about how actually their kind of impact angle, or their, you know, their social angle is actually allowing them to not just survive but thrive during this time when some of their peers or competitors might be struggling.
Yeah, sure. Happy to chat, because Work 180 has been so phenomenal in the way that they've adapted to this this environment. And I think so to give the audience context, if you're not aware of Work 180, they're a jobs platform that flips the model on its head. So they pre-screen employers before they're allowed to list, and the employers have to have at least a baseline in terms of policies that support women in the workforce to actually empower women to choose jobs that are right for them. And what they're finding is that their brand is really strong in the market, and people are, you know, they're getting inbound inquiries to be able to demonstrate that these employers, whilst they might not be hiring as much now, and, you know, it's kind of tough times and they're weathering the storm, the value of the brand in attracting people on the other side of this is really key. And so being able to say that they support women in the workforce, and, you know, I should say as well, the stats are showing that women have been harder hit by COVID-19, and, you know, more job losses as well. You know, in Australia, we're actually looking to, I think last time I checked, it was nearly 1 million people unemployed. So that's, you know, really unfortunate. And on the other side of this, employers are going to need to be able to kind of show that they're the best people to work for. And so Work 180 helps with that kind of tick of approval.
Yeah, and again, a shout out to the founders, Gemma and Valeria are just amazing. And it's been incredible to see what they have done from when I first met them back in StartMate to today. So that's been really exciting. I think that I'm going to, we're going to ask another poll question in a moment, but I wanted to ask how you measure impact. So first of all, how do you think about impact, and then how do you actually instrument it and measure it within the fund?
Sure. So when we're thinking about impact initially, when we first see an opportunity, we're thinking about whether it fits within one of our 3 themes, so health and wellbeing, sustainable living, and empowering people. And then we think about whether it's potentially measurable. And the reason for that, and there's a bit of debate about whether or not impact should be measured. If you're doing a good thing, people should just know that you're doing a good thing, and that should be enough. But actually, you can't really increase your impact or amplify the work that you're doing if it's not measured. You know, and that's our kind of philosophy, that we've got to kind of set baselines to be able to improve, and measurement helps with that. So we think about whether it's measurable. We also look at whether the impact is embedded in the business model. So effectively, for every $1 of revenue, a unit of impact needs to be created. So I'll use GoTerra again as the example. You know, they're a waste management business. Inherent in their business model is reducing organic waste from landfill. So their metric is tons of organic waste diverted from landfill. So that's pretty straightforward. We know that founders are busy and we don't want to create a reporting burden. So what we do is we work with the founders early on to then work out a metric that works for them too, and demonstrates their impact. And a lot of the time, the founders have actually used the metrics to be able to sell to their customers too, and demonstrated that their customers want that impact as well, and need to kind of know about that impact in order to kind of demonstrate what they're doing as individual organisations working with these impact companies.
And so do you find that that is, for many of your portfolio companies, is that a selling point to their end user that they do have an impact lens? Or are they just, you know, great products and great services and it's just an added benefit that they have that angle? Like, where are we in Australia or globally on, as consumers, are we voting with our wallet as much as you'd assume?
I think we're increasingly voting with our wallets, but you know, there's some room to go there, and it depends on the organisations that these startups are selling to, whether or not impact is important or valued by the customer. And I think they understand their customers well enough that they do use the impact where it's relevant, but it's not always for some customers. And the great thing about these businesses are they're commercial businesses, so they have a strong value proposition anyway. The impact is really great to help along with that. But I think we do, you know, we're seeing there's increasing demand and a shift to millennials in terms of quantum of wealth, who seem to care more about social and environmental issues as a gross generalisation. But it's certainly moving in the right direction, but we have some way to go.
I'm going to actually, so this is a nice segue to our second poll question, because I am a little curious to know that in this post-COVID world, do you think that impact investing is going to grow or shrink? And what I actually am thinking about here is, do you think that COVID is going to have an impact so that people are thinking more inwardly and individually and thinking about themselves, or if they're thinking more broadly around community, environment, kind of some of these big macro issues? So if everyone can vote now on grow and shrink, and think about grow and shrink as a proxy for grow, meaning, you know, more companies should be solving big, massive problems that are kind of community-based, or shrinking because people are going to be focused on me, myself, my family, my very small locus of my bubble, my stay-at-home bubble. So if everyone could take a moment to vote, we will see what folks think that COVID is doing to our collective psyches.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the results on this, because it's definitely a question that I wonder about our collective psyche on what's happening. Are people more optimistic or pessimistic about what's next for us as a kind of society and broader community?
So once the results are up, we'll get your vote, but right now we don't want to lead the witness. So we'll give everyone just a quick second. And do we have the results? Grow. Wow. Pareto, we have 80-20 rule. 80% of folks actually think that impact investing will be more important and that we'll be solving big global challenges together collectively rather than looking inward. What would you have said, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely grow. And I'm really pleased to see that the majority also think that way. I think things like COVID and also the bushfires preceding COVID-19 have really highlighted the need to solve some of these problems right now, you know, and how critical these problems are in, you know, underpinning our economy, and how we grow from here really needs that private capital and public capital to solve these issues. So I'm really pleased to see that people are thinking about the collective, and that they think others will too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think that if anything, COVID has reminded me that we are even as an island continent, we are truly part of a global community, and there are no borders, especially when it comes to viruses that pass freely, irrespective of borders and of communities. And so I'm really pleased, at least, to see that amongst our listeners, there's a recognition that we have to think community-based and think bigger in our problem solving, because one, it's unlikely that problems are going to remain small, and it's unlikely that we will solve problems, you know, on a small basis. Do you agree? Do you think that the actual nature, literally the virality of this pandemic is going to force us to just recognize that we are no longer alone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think things like this, any crisis that an individual or a community goes through, it makes you really think about what's important and, how to prioritize and, who we are we're kind of a small speck in amongst the big wide world. So, what's our role in that and how do we make a difference? And, do we reimagine what we have today or do we cling to what we had yesterday? And I think, when we think about the kind of grief cycle, I go back to that because it depends on where you are on that cycle as to whether or not you're thinking about acceptance and meaning from this crisis, or if you're still in the area of kind of denial or anger or depression, kind of in that mode where you're not thinking about the future. And I think there's no right or wrong. You are feeling what you're feeling, but I think as a collective, it seems to me that we're moving beyond and becoming more optimistic and thinking about our role as a little speck in that big wide world.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's so many studies that show that in times of stress, and this is an evolutionary biological response. In times of stress, you just think very small because there's no point in planning for tomorrow if you are in a fight or flight mode. And so I think that it's been such a positive kind of leading indicator that we are starting to think bigger beyond ourselves. It's showing that we have optimism that, things are going to start to stabilize. And I think the conversation I'm already seeing is shifting, not to will we be okay, but actually what are some of the lessons that we have learned while being sheltered in place for the last few months? What are the realizations or some of the insights that we have taken, and how do we make sure that we don't go back to business as usual, but we actually are moving forward? Through that light, what do you think are some of the things that you hope we don't go back to, and you think that we have learned during this time that we should be taking forward?
I hope we don't go back to feeling like offices are, critical and that everyone has to show their face and, FaceTime becomes, again, kind of a measure of productivity. I think what we're realizing is it's definitely not the case, and flexible work actually supports a lot more people. Some people don't like that kind of environment where, you're at home alone effectively, but giving people the choice, I think, is the most important thing. I also hope that we don't forget about our neighbours and our community. I think we've come together really well and we've had that community feel. And, I know at least in my street and area, we've been talking a lot more with our neighbours, which has been really lovely, and looking out for each other. And also particularly looking out for the kind of elderly neighbours in the street and checking that they're okay. And I think that's really nice, and I hope that doesn't get lost. And then, lastly, I think it's the urgency of these issues that need to be solved, both social and environmental. I hope we don't forget that they're still critical post this period, and that we do actually get on and solve them.
Yeah, we've seen so many
Oh, have we lost you there? Rachel?
I think Rachel might be having a few technical difficulties. Rachel, do we have you back?
Can you hear me now?
If not, we might just shift gears to some audience Q&A while we're waiting for Rachel to reconnect. Thank you.
I'm not sure if it was me or the other Rachel, and so I was just sitting awkwardly. Staring
all I can say is that I was on a roll. That was one of the best monologues I've ever given. So everyone listening at home, you missed a really good diatribe from me. But Rohit, you're right. Let's just, what I was going to say is that there have been beautiful examples, and to your point, Rachel, around we have literally seen the planet take a big breath while we've been staying at home, and we're seeing waters clear. We're seeing, we saw in Italy that the canals of Venice have fish in it for the first time. We're seeing that in India, they have views of the Himalayas that they hadn't seen for 35 years. And so, yeah, I'm sure the planet is thanking us for this momentary reprieve, and hopefully we realize how critical that is going forward. But to your point, exactly, let's kick off. We have some great questions that have come in through the Q&A, and some folks have pre-submitted questions, so let's roll with some of those.
We do have some great questions, and I apologize that everyone missed Rachel's monologue as well. As someone who's heard plenty of them, I can say they're fantastic. So we probably need a backup recording just in case. But thank you both for an extremely insightful discussion. As Rachel mentioned, I'm sure that there are a few people that are already familiar with impact investing, but I think this was also an opportunity for some people that might be new to the space to learn a little bit more as well. And thank you all for submitting some great questions, both to the registration process. Just a reminder as well, if you have any additional questions, just submit them through the Q&A tab, and we'll try and get to as many questions as possible. There's a few that are similar, so I'm going to try and group a couple of them together. And the first one is from Brian Rollins and Hitesh Mehta, who had a very similar question around how does Giant Leap weight the amount of impact versus the potential return when making an investment decision?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think in some ways we think about them because it's almost like you're using two sides of the brain. You're thinking with a commercial side and, thinking about the numbers, and then you're thinking about the emotional side and the impact. And so we actually assess them both, so that if you don't pass our commercial hurdle, then you won't, but there's impact there, then it won't pass our screen. And also vice versa, the impact side of things, needs to be there along with the commercial return. So we're invested alongside a lot of traditional VCs, but that impact element is really critical, and impact is super subjective. And so we have that debate in our team, and it's really down to the level of conviction that the team has. And then in the due diligence process, sorry, tongue-tied, we look at the impact management framework. So the impact management project is basically a framework that a lot of investors are starting to use now, that looks at the degree of impact that's being created. So we assess that and talk to our chief impact officer about that as well. So there are a couple of kind of stages, but we acknowledge it's very subjective.
As a follow-up question submitted by Nanisha Rajadurai, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Can you talk a little bit more specifically in terms of the process that you follow for measuring the impact as well? So what type of measurement do you put behind different businesses as you're assessing their ability to make an impact with their business?
So again, we look at the impact management project to assess that kind of level of impact. So it's got 5 elements. It's who are the beneficiaries, how much impact is being created, what is that impact, the contribution that our investment makes for that impact, and then also the unintended consequences, so the risks associated with that, in kind of the working out whether it sits along a spectrum, which they talk about as being, they refer to it as the ABC model. So avoid harm, benefit people and planet, or contribute to solutions. And we work out where the individual startup sits along that spectrum. Then when it comes to measurement itself, I spoke before about us making sure that it works for the startup too. So we talk about very practical metrics. So, and in the absence of the data, the hard data, we also talk about quality of, case studies, for example, to help support the impact and demonstrate that. So it's not as clean cut as we take these metrics off the shelf and we measure, exactly carbon emissions. For not all of them will have that kind of clean cut metric like carbon emissions avoided. Work 180 as an example, we use case studies to show how many companies have changed their policies in order to list with Work 180. We do look at kind of stats in terms of women hired for businesses that had never previously hired women into those types of roles, but it's not as straightforward as we would hope, because impact is subjective, like I was saying before.
The next question is submitted by Manita Ray, who wants to know, besides having a good product, service, strong cash flow, what might help a business in managing this current crisis? And are there any additional characteristics that you've seen that make businesses more resilient to survive and thrive in a crisis like this?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of approach as to how to manage a crisis like this, cash is king, and many people will have heard a lot of people say the same thing, but that's because at this point in time, extending your runway is really, really key. But I think depending on the business and the sector that you're in, you can't ignore product and the way that you're operating and your service that you're providing or the product you're delivering, and ensuring that there's still that element of focus, that you are solving a problem in this strange environment we're in and into the future in the post-COVID world. So I think balancing, first and foremost, make sure you're extending that runway, and then look to the value that you provide in this changed environment and into the future. And then there was a second part to the question, which I have forgotten.
So the questions were just mainly around, are there specific characteristics that you think, outside of just having good cash flow, that you think would help businesses be more resilient or survive and thrive in crisis?
Oh, and yeah, so that element is, so post GFC, B Lab, who are the entity that certifies B Corps. So for those that aren't familiar with that certification, it's effectively what fair trade is to coffee. So, are they ethical, sustainable, looking at supply chains, etc. And post GFC, B Lab found that B Corps were 63% more likely to survive and thrive after the GFC. And I think that there's just something to be said about being an impact business where you are ensuring that all the way along the supply chain, you are being ethical and sustainable and supporting your employees. Because in the good times, if you're supporting your employees, in the tough times, they'll be understanding and support you as well. And so I think ensuring that you have those that type of integrity in your business is really going to help resilience. And we're seeing that with our portfolio companies too.
Obviously with the second poll, we were trying to gauge whether people would generally be sort of more optimistic or pessimistic about the future post-COVID. And, I think startups by nature tend to be a little bit more skewed towards the optimistic side. But there's a couple of questions submitted by Sulin Stubbs and Oliver Pring around similar themes in terms of, do you think that there's a risk that climate change initiatives take a backward step as governments try to focus on reinvigorating the economy, or kind of focus more on short-term measures?
Unfortunately, I feel like there's always a risk of that, but I'm optimistic that that risk won't be realised. I hope that this has really brought to light the climate change issues and really the need to solve them, and also brought some facts to the surface around that we should rely on coal. That's certainly not the case, and we're seeing that in this environment, that actually to create a more sustainable future, we should be shifting towards renewable energy. As the current CEO of Beyond Zero Emissions, a climate change think tank, says, that it's like investing in DVDs right now. We can't go back. It makes no sense. Why would we go back? So I think we need to really think about moving forward.
And then I think the onus is on us as consumers to, as we talked about before, vote with our wallets and make sure that we're supporting those companies that are, thinking about the next wave of where energy comes from. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that one of those things to think about is that everyone in the audience is an investor if you have super. That's something that you can choose where your money goes. Even in your, so you've got those investments, and then you also have the choices you can make as a consumer, but knowing and just being more conscious of that and making sure that it aligns with where you see the future being is really important to acknowledge.
The next question is submitted by Vijay Solanki, who wanted to know, how has COVID-19 changed your expectations with your current portfolio? For example, Academy XI shifting from a campus or physical to a more digital and hybrid learning model. And I guess to add to that question, how does that, if at all, has shifted the way that you look at investments moving forward in terms of the particular characteristics, or in terms of founders or companies as well?
And I have a follow-up question to that as well, Rachel, after you.
Okay, great. So in terms of our portfolio, I think it's just been, you know, like I was saying before, it's impacted each of our portfolio companies differently. I think as a whole, I've been really pleased by the fact that because they impact businesses, you know, and addressing real social environmental problems, those problems aren't going away. And so post this environment, I think they'll still be thriving. And we've got a number in digital health. And I think that's been really great to see the kind of open thinking about how health can be more kind of online and less just kind of face to face. So I think that's really, you know, been great in thinking about the opportunities ahead for our portfolio companies. And I think any VC or investor could today try and pick winners in their portfolio, and tomorrow they could be wrong. So I think this is just re-emphasised that can be the case. And we still don't know who are going to be the kind of winners out of all of this, but I think we're just thinking more cautiously about making any bets right now. And then in terms of the investments we're looking at, I think it's that what I was talking about before in terms of the sectors that will be what's happened today and then what's going to happen into the future. We're thinking about that very closely when looking at new opportunities.
I'm going to jump in with my follow-up question because I get to hog the mic. But, you know, if I'm synthesizing so many great things that you said, Rachel, you know, upfront talking about cash is king, looking for that additional runway, I think the underlying sentiment there is in case the purse strings tighten and the funding environment changes. You just mentioned kind of that caution. Vijay asked about, you know, what are your changing expectations? Are you, and I think lots of founders are asking this question of all investors in general, are you thinking more around, or are you thinking about shortening the time or expectation of your companies to think about profitability, think about those unit economics in exchange for, you know, Wild West days of growth? Like, is growth dead? And are we, God forbid, thinking about profitability?
I feel like I could debate this for hours because I think we don't believe in growth for the sake of growth. You know, we still believe in sustainable business models. We are obviously kind of going for the same type of returns that other VCs are going for because, you know, in terms of portfolio theory for VCs, you hope that a couple of your investments will return the majority of the portfolio. So you kind of have to target that 10x potential, not probability, potential. And so we're still looking at that. But yeah, in terms of growth for growth's sake, that's never been something that we've kind of bought into. And I think profitability and sustainability is ideal. But, you know, if you can invest more to grow more and faster and solve those problems quicker, then I think that's, you know, really positive.
Yep. So I usually end every one of my interviews with the same question, which is around your hopes for the future post-COVID. But I think we've touched upon those. So I'm going to just end with a different question for you. And that is just with your investor hat on. And so many people who dial into these love to hear from investors because they themselves are seeking investment. What is the favorite question that you ask founders that you think is the one that elucidates the most insight for you with one single question?
I think it's why the founder started the business, because what we're trying to, we're investing in people, and what we're trying to get at is who is that person that we're investing in, and really understanding their drive to solve the problem and their lived experience. And trying to break down some of the barriers. I think it's really challenging with an investor-founder relationship. There's an inherent power dynamic, which I hate, and but it is the reality. We've got the funds, and then the founders seeking funds. It's just how it is. But we're trying to learn who they are as people. So I think that question for me is one of the most important.
Yep. Well, in getting to know humans, Rachael, it's been a pleasure in the last few years for me to get to know you as a human, as well as an amazing investor. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for the audience for experimenting with us with the poll and participating. Hopefully that was fun, and thanks for the great questions. Rohit will take us on home, and hopefully we'll see you guys all next week. Same time, same place.
Just reiterating what Rachael mentioned, just thank you very much to both of the Rachels for sharing some fascinating insights from a VC and impact perspective. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to the community this afternoon, and also a big thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. Two quick notes from me before we sign off. As mentioned previously, we will be running this as a weekly webinar series every Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. Our next guest will be Tim Doyle, the founder of Eucalyptus. Tim is one of the leading marketers in Australia, and in this session, we will dive deep on customer acquisition strategies at Eucalyptus and from his previous role as head of marketing at Koala. And secondly, as a thank you for joining us, we're providing $5,000 in AWS Activate credits available to everyone who has registered and attended the session. The details and terms and conditions behind this offer will be sent to you via email. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next week.